So I attended CSW this year because normally the Sex Discrimination Commissioner attends CSW, but this year the position was vacant during the time of CSW. So the Commission was very kindly invited by the Australian Government to sit with the Australian Government delegation, and I was the representative of the Commission, fortunately. So that's how I went to CSW, and the purposes of the Commission attending CSW this year was twofold. So firstly was really to look at issues around women's economic empowerment and economic security, and also violence against women in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals. And secondly, it was to advocate for national human rights institutions, which is what we are. We're a national human rights institution, to have independent participation status at CSW. So this is something that we have been advocating for many, many years, and is also one of the reasons why we need to go on the government delegations, is because we don't actually have independent participation status at CSW. So even though national human rights institutions are a product of the UN, we're formed under UN Paris principles, there are still some forums within the UN where we don't have those participation rights. Very interestingly, in December last year, the General Assembly passed a resolution calling for greater participation rights for national human rights institutions to be afforded in forums such as CSW and other forums where it's not currently there. So one of our big aims actually for this CSW was to go and advance that General Assembly resolution and actually get some recognition within the CSW agreed conclusions around what national human rights institutions' independent participation status could look like. So with that in mind, we actually had a side event where a number of national human rights institutions from around the Asia Pacific and the world spoke. And we also had representatives from various UN agencies. The Australian Government co-sponsored that side event, which was fantastic. And at the end of the 2 weeks of negotiations, we were actually extremely fortunate to succeed in getting a whole paragraph around national human rights institutions and their independent participation status, recognising the General Assembly resolution and calling on CSW to take further steps towards our recognition. So that was the most exciting thing. It's a very technical point, but it does enable national human rights institutions from around the world to continue the work that we've been doing around women's rights, around young women's and girls' rights, both at CSW and also back home in our country. So I just wanted to say that was great. And also just wanted to thank the support that we had to get that through from the non-government organisations in Australia as well as overseas, but also from the Australian Government delegation. It was enormous. It was an enormous effort that it actually happened. So a big thank you to both of those groups. On that note, I just wanted to commend what a strong and big delegation from women's groups, NGOs from Australia we had at CSW60 this year. And you know, just to reiterate, congratulations to all of the people who attended and the diversity in that group. I know there was times when there was people missing, but there was an incredible diversity. We had women with disability, we had Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women, not just one, but you know, a group of women from each of these diverse groups. We had LBTI women, we had young women, we had all the different women's alliances. Like it was an incredibly strong contingent. And I also want to say that this year it was fantastic to see the Australian Government side events include so many of the national women's alliances in their side events. I think that was really fantastic to showcase the work that both NGOs and government are doing in Australia. There are two NGO reps, because I don't know that they'll get a chance to say this. There was two NGO reps on the Australian Government delegation this year. Anu, you're going to hear from shortly, and also Sarah, who can't be with us today. But I do want to just say what a fantastic job they did in being that access point between civil society and government, being that access point about what language, what negotiations we can get through into those agreed conclusions. And they did a fantastic job. Really well done. And I do actually want to commend the Australian Government delegation as well this year. Minister Cash couldn't go, unfortunately, at the last minute, but Natasha Stockdale led it, along with, when she wasn't there, Sally Moyle, and also Louise McSorley. And I just think that they did such a good job in raising the sort of range of issues that are happening in Australia, so and getting them into the agreed conclusions, including the people at Post, which is the people in New York, the government delegation members in New York, who you don't often get a chance to see. And they're having to negotiate those issues every day. And so it's really interesting to see that they're prioritising women's issues in their negotiations, and that's what I think was really exciting to see. Just finally, about the agreed conclusions. It was, I mean, they're obviously at the end of the day, they're the document that we go home with, right? That's what we go home with. It was frustrating sometimes during the negotiations at the start of the 2 weeks, when the first thing that's up for negotiations is the words women's human rights, right? Like right from day one, it was like, this is not a document where we should have the words women's human rights in it. Why? Because this is about sustainable development goals, and this is about development. So why should we have the words women's human rights in there? Now, when you're faced with that kind of challenge right from the start, I just think we have to commend the work of the governments and the NGOs who managed the agreed conclusions that actually came out. We held our ground. Okay, we didn't go backwards. And that was the risk of this CSW, was that we would go backwards. And we were able to hold our ground at least until the Beijing Platform for Language. You know, if nothing else, at least go back to the Beijing language. So even the Sustainable Development Goals language was sometimes not as strong as the Beijing language, right? So it was really important in those negotiations that we held our ground, given the kinds of challenges that were coming at us. And when we look at those agreed conclusions, they are broad. They are very, very comprehensive, right? They cover a lot of the economic empowerment issues, the violence against women issues, the women's leadership issues. There were challenges around sexual and reproductive health rights. I think the biggest loss would have been around sexual orientation and gender identity. That didn't get up, right, as always. But there is a lot there to work with. Okay? And just a quick example of how we can work with that stuff. There is, for example, a very, very small reference to the need for data collection on unpaid caring work. Right? That can be used as an agreed conclusion for Australia to reinforce its efforts to collect data on unpaid caring work, such as through time use surveys. Right? It's just a small example of how you can, it's so useful, those agreed conclusions. There are so many things in there that we can use to advocate for national implementation. So I'll just leave it at that.